It happened 1,366 times. In the span of a single year, the chief of police for Connecticut's second-largest city funneled $373,000 into online gambling accounts. He would go on to wager $4.5 million on FanDuel and DraftKings. The money was siphoned from two sources: a fund meant to pay confidential informants who were risking their lives to dismantle the drug trade, and a youth sports initiative that provided basketball clinics and Christmas toys for children. His name was Carl Jacobson. For 6 years, as the chief of the New Haven Police Department, he was the sole custodian of the cash. There were no audits, no requirements for a second signature, no oversight of any kind. On July 6, 2022, Carl Jacobson stood inside New Haven City Hall, where Mayor Justin Eller administered the oath of office, making him the city's new police chief. His confirmation by the Board of Alders had been unanimous. His daughter, Kelly, a criminal justice major at the University of New Haven, who had once credited her father's dinner table stories for her choice of career, came forward to pin the chief's badge to his chest. It was a moment Jacobson had spent 25 years in law enforcement earning. His career began in 1998 as a patrol officer in East Providence, Rhode Island. He transferred to the New Haven Police Department in 2007, methodically ascending through every rank: officer, sergeant, lieutenant. As an assistant chief, he studied a course at the University of New Haven titled Policing Fragile Communities, taught by Professor Lorenzo Boyd. In the wake of the George Floyd protests, he spoke of accountability and promised integrity, insisting that the department had to rebuild its fractured relationship with the community it was sworn to protect. The city paid him $180,000 a year and entrusted him with a cash fund that no one else was watching. To grasp the full weight of Carl Jacobson's betrayal, one must first understand New Haven. It is a city of profound contradictions. Yale University, with its $12 billion endowment, sits at its heart, yet 1 out of every 4 New Haven residents lives in poverty. Neighborhoods like Fairhaven and New Hallville are burdened with some of the highest crime rates in Connecticut, and the police department itself was already scarred by scandal. Back in 2004, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had raided police headquarters, arresting a prominent narcotics detective on corruption charges. And in 2023, the city settled a $45 million lawsuit in the case of Randy Cox, a black man left paralyzed after being transported, unsecured, in the back of a police van. A 2024 survey revealed that only 42% of the public approved of the department's performance. Trust was already a fragile commodity, and the Confidential Informant Fund, the precise instrument created to combat the drug epidemic in those struggling neighborhoods, was on the verge of becoming the chief's private slush fund. The Narcotic Enforcement Program Fund was established with a singular objective: to compensate the confidential informants, whose cooperation allowed detectives to build cases against drug traffickers. These were individuals who put their safety, and sometimes their lives, on the line to offer tips and conduct controlled buys. The city refilled the account with $5,000 from the general fund each month. In 2019, Jacobson, then the assistant chief of the detective division, assumed exclusive control over it. When he ascended to chief in 2022, departmental regulations stipulated that he relinquish control to the next assistant chief of investigations. He simply chose not to. This decision fostered an environment devoid of any accountability. A single individual controlled, received, and distributed all the money. A single individual kept the one and only transaction ledger. No secondary signature was required, no monthly reconciliations were ever done, and in the course of their inquiry, investigators would uncover a stunning fact. Not one cash audit had been performed since Jacobson took command of the fund in 2019. For 6 years, $60,000 flowed into the fund annually, and nobody ever checked. This was not the first time the department had encountered issues with this specific fund. At least twice in the preceding 2 decades, the New Haven Police Department had dealt with irregularities in its confidential informant fund. Still, the deeply flawed, single-person control system was left unchanged. For 6 years, absolutely nothing stood between Carl Jacobson and a steady supply of cash. The compulsion that drove him to take it was a puzzle that investigators would later assemble from bank statements and a confession he made, unaware he was being recorded. Jacobson had a history of battling alcohol addiction. He had assured his assistant chiefs that his drinking was behind him, but he had merely swapped one demon for another. Between January 1st, 2025, and January 8, 2026, a period of just 373 days. Jacobson initiated 1,366 separate transfers to FanDuel and DraftKings. This equates to an average of more than 3.6 transfers every day. He wagered a total of $4,464,884, roughly $3.1 million on FanDuel, and another $1.3 million on DraftKings. His net losses amounted to $214,365. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was tasked with the forensic accounting of his bank record. Investigators discovered a clear trail of $14,000 in stolen informant fund checks leading directly into his personal bank account. The deposits were made on the exact same days the checks were issued, with the money then rerouted immediately to online gambling applications. His routine was brazen. He would cash city-issued checks in the morning, and by afternoon, he was placing bets with the stolen funds. Between January of 2024 and January of 2026, Jacobson's scheme netted him $81,500 from the informant fund and another $4,000 from the youth sports program. During the year 2025 alone, he converted 14 separate checks, each for $5,000. That was a total of $70,000. Yet expenditure reports could only account for $23,000. The remaining $47,000 had simply vanished, absorbed by his gambling accounts, and by November of 2025, the payments to informants had ceased completely. First, November passed, then December, and still nothing. The vital narcotics investigations that relied on these confidential sources slowed to a standstill. Active drug operations in some of New Haven's most at-risk neighborhoods had been critically undermined. The individuals who had risked their own safety to work with the police were left exposed, unpaid, and unprotected. But the informant fund wasn't the only pool of money Jacobson was draining. The Police Activity League Fund represented the purest form of community trust. Donations came from local businesses and city residents alike. Police officers themselves had money automatically taken from their paychecks to support it, funding summer camps, basketball programs, and Christmas toy drives for the city's most underserved areas. In December of 2025, with Christmas just days away, a strange request was made. Jacobson instructed Administrative Assistant Tina Traglio to prepare 2 checks adding up to $4,000, with the memo line on each reading Toy Giveaway and Toy Drive. Both checks were payable directly to Carl Jacobson. For Traglio, this was a serious red flag. A toy drive request, emerging so close to the holiday, with checks made out personally to the chief, felt deeply irregular. She later reported what she had observed to investigators. Carl Jacobson was taking money that his own officers had given from their paychecks to buy Christmas gifts for children, and he was gambling it away. On the 23rd of December, 2025, 2 separate streams of suspicion converged on a single point. As Tremaglio raised alarms about the checks, a sergeant in the intelligence unit, Sergeant Sanchez, was simultaneously alerting Assistant Chief David Zanelli to his own concerns about Jacobson's conduct. That's when Zanelli started digging. He pulled the records for both the Informant Fund and the Youth Sports Fund, and what he uncovered was so disturbing it prompted him to bring in the department's other 2 assistant chiefs, Bertram Etienne and Manme Batana. Batana had been honored as Woman of the Year by the Indo-American Association of Connecticut for her dedication to community outreach. Etienne was a career officer who had come up through the ranks at the same time as Zanelli. Now, these 3 individuals who had forged their careers under the leadership of Carl Jacobson were faced with an unthinkable reality. Their chief was systematically stealing from his own department. They agreed he had to be confronted, but Zanelli was worried. He had no idea how a cornered police chief might lash out. That fear led him to make a decision that would prove to be pivotal. On the morning of January 5, 2026, the 3 assistant chiefs stepped into Jacobson's office at police headquarters. As they entered, Zanelli discreetly activated the recording function on his department-issued cell phone, later stating he did so out of fear for how Jacobson might react. Etienne posed the first question: how much money is missing? Jacobson claimed it was $10,000 from the last 2 months, and when asked how long it had been going on, he insisted it was a recent problem, only within the last month. Both statements were calculated falsehoods. The real total was $85,500, taken over a period of 2 years. Then, the recording captured the damning admission prosecutors would later hear. Jacobson confessed that after conquering an alcohol problem, he had turned to gambling. He claimed he didn't understand why the compulsion had recently intensified. He acknowledged spending far too much money on bets, but what came next revealed Carl Jacobson's true moral compass. He implored the three men to allow him to replace the money, alter the logbooks, and simply retire without any trouble. He was explicitly asking for a way to avoid prison and, most importantly, to prevent the loss of his pension for misusing public funds. He promised he was in the process of securing a loan to put all the money back. When confronted with the reality that he had stolen from informants on the front lines of the drug war and from children anticipating Christmas presents, his primary instinct was not shame. It was to save his pension. The three assistant chiefs refused his proposal. Jacobson resigned from his position that same day, walking out of the department before he could be officially put on administrative leave. The city forwarded the case to New Haven State's Attorney John P. Doyle, who then conferred with Chief State's Attorney Patrick J. Griffin. Griffin publicly stated that an allegation of embezzlement by a police official is an extremely serious breach that has the potential to erode public trust in the entire justice system. To prevent any potential conflict of interest, the case was handed over to an outside prosecutor, New Britain State's Attorney Christian M. Watson, with Connecticut State Police Lieutenant Sebastian Wordle tapped to lead the official investigation. On January 16th, Jacobson made a move to return $4,000 in cash to the Youth Sports Fund. He contacted the executive director with an apology, claiming the money was originally intended for a toy drive. The coordinator refused to take the money. Then, on February 20th, 2026, Carl Jacobson surrendered to the Connecticut State Police in Montville, where he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree larceny for defrauding a public community. Bond was set at $150,000. The court imposed strict conditions: a complete prohibition on online gambling, a ban on visiting any casinos, and no access whatsoever to employer funds. At his arraignment on March 6th in New Haven Superior Court, Jacobson appeared before Judge Calistro. He entered no plea. His defense attorney, Gregory Saratelli, addressed reporters, stating that an arrest is not evidence of guilt and that mere allegations do not constitute proof. He portrayed Jacobson as a man who had dedicated his entire career to helping others, asking the public for a measure of grace. But this is where the narrative takes a deeply disturbing turn. Before his career ended in a forced retirement, Carl Jacobson cashed in approximately 150 unused sick days. Under the state of Connecticut's rules, these days were converted into additional years of credited service, a maneuver that inflated his pension calculation. The Pension and Retirement Board approved his annual pension at $124,332, which amounted to $10,361 every month. His first payment was set to be disbursed on February 28, 2026. This was a mere 8 days after his arrest. According to Connecticut Statute 1-110A, the Attorney General holds the power to petition the Superior Court to reduce or entirely revoke a public employee's pension, but this can only happen after a felony conviction, not after an arrest, not following a recorded admission, only after a conviction is secured. Since 2011, the state has initiated proceedings to revoke the pensions of 31 convicted public employees, but until Carl Jacobson is formally convicted, he collects every last dollar. Mayor Eller described the case as deeply troubling, affirming that no one is above the law, while Governor Ned Lamont asserted that the system had worked because the individual was apprehended. But in Fairhaven, during a tense community meeting, residents made it clear that a resignation was not nearly enough. They demanded to know how this was allowed to happen and insisted on guarantees that it could never be repeated. The facts speak for themselves. For a period of 6 years, not one single audit was performed on the informant fund. One man maintained absolute control over every dollar, with zero oversight, inside a department that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had probed for the very same type of corruption just 2 decades earlier. The confidential informant program was halted for 2 months as the city scrambled to implement new controls. This suspension stalled vital drug investigations in some of Connecticut's most vulnerable neighborhoods. The city has since instituted a series of reforms, including monthly audits instead of annual ones, and storing fund cash in a safe with digital access and video monitoring. Monthly replenishments must now be signed off on by the Chief Administrative Officer. There is now a clear separation between those who manage the funds and those tasked with auditing them. The Police Executive Research Forum was contracted to establish new best practices that meet national standards. Governor Lamont expressed wider concerns, highlighting the unchecked explosion of online sports gambling in Connecticut. He characterized platforms like FanDuel and various prediction markets as being like the Wild West. A law enforcement bulletin published by the Bureau noted that problem gambling among officers is a significantly underreported issue, with some studies estimating the rate to be as high as 8%, a figure more than double that of the general population. Back in 2022, Carl Jacobson stood at New Haven City Hall as his daughter pinned a badge to his chest, and he promised the city accountability. He had studied the methods of policing fragile communities. He knew all the right words, and he used them perfectly. Yet behind those words, he was draining a fund meant to fight the city's drug trade and stealing from a program that bought Christmas toys for children, all to place bets on his phone. His next court appearance is scheduled for March 19, 2026. If he is convicted on both counts of first-degree larceny, he could face a prison sentence of up to 20 years. But the question that hangs over this case is not whether one man stole. It is how an entire system, a department, a city, a state, allowed him to do it for 6 years without anyone ever checking. If this story made you reconsider who we trust with public money, subscribe to Federal Watch News. We have more investigations coming. Justice never sleeps. The story of Carl Jacobson is more than a tale of a fallen official. It is a haunting reminder that the badge of leadership is a sacred bond, not a shield for personal demons. When the very hands meant to protect a community instead siphon hope from its most vulnerable, stealing Christmas joy from children and safety from those on the front lines, the wounds cut deeper than any financial loss. This tragedy teaches us that integrity is not a destination, but a daily choice. It reminds us that addiction is a shapeshifter, often trading one vice for another, and that no amount of professional prestige can outrun a hollowed-out character. True leadership demands the humility to embrace oversight. A system without accountability is merely a tragedy waiting for a timestamp. We must demand transparency not because we lack faith in people, but because power without a second signature is a trap for the soul. Let this be our lesson. Trust is earned in the light, but maintained in the dark. Guard your character with more ferocity than your rank, for once the public's trust is gambled away, no amount of money can ever buy it back. Justice never sleeps, and the truth always finds its way home.